Welcome to LifeWorks Today. This podcast is provided so that together we can create a world in which all people love their lives. Our current human systems aren't working. The way of superior versus inferior, or management versus employee, or adult versus child. We need a powerful, positive, and sustainable transformation. This podcast is for you who seek to be happy, fulfilled, and peaceful so that your abundant life works today.
So welcome everybody to LifeWorks Today. This podcast is designed to bring you hope and new ideas in your personal and your professional life. This show is about human systems. A system saves you stress, time, energy, and money. And human systems are here to help us in how we think, speak, act, and feel. Whatever you learn in each episode of these podcasts will be applicable in your life at work or at home or even in the larger community. Today's episode will be one in which everyone can relate to, especially if we're stuck at home with our kids or something. It will be a start to the answer, what can I do when people frustrate me with bad behavior? But before I dive into this podcast, I want to review some things that I've covered in the past episodes because I think it'll really help us in today's program. I also want to mention that because of the pandemic, we're doing this on Zoom, and I have a guest on the line who's doing it even outside, so she's got some quiet, and you might hear a few birds in the background or a few sound glitches, but hopefully you understand that with all that's going on. In my recent episodes, I mentioned that the work I do is based on the psychology of Alfred Adler. And I want to just remind all of you of the 5 concepts that he put forward that I'll be referencing in today's episode. So Adler said, basically, we're social beings. We're hardwired to seek healthy belonging and significance so that we feel those 4 core feelings of feeling empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. And when I think about misbehavior, I think I might have given this example before, even the person that is in a gang who's instructed to kill somebody in order to get into the gang, they might do that if the only place they believe that they can get their needs met for feeling empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing is in a gang. They will go that far with it because these needs are so important. And there's a really great set of movies that I just watched the last couple of nights, and one was called, it's a documentary called Happy, and there's another documentary called I Am that was directed and starred in by Tom Shadyac. And those are really good because they give you a lot of data on how we are truly hardwired to be connected and to be cooperative with each other, even though it doesn't always look that way. So when we don't feel that healthy sense of belonging and significance, what happens is we fall into that inferiority complex and that shame spiral that I mentioned in an earlier episode. And that is what is underneath all struggle and all negative behavior. So it's just good to remember that. We're going to be kind of hitting that over and over again. All misbehavior is connected to those 4 core needs. So the second thing Adler said is we're very subjective. So we're always facing circumstances and choosing how we interpret them. We could be in the same family with a Siamese twin even and have a different interpretation of what we're seeing and hearing. And even though a lot of that is influenced by the conditioning of other people, we're ultimately the ones that decide and draw our own conclusions about what we see. That's why this psychology is called individual psychology, because our subjectivity is our own private logic. And none of us, in some ways we're very alike, and in other ways, none of us are exactly the same at all. The third concept is that we're purposeful. That means that everything we do has a goal associated with it, or goals. And a lot of the time, those goals are unconscious, but we're really trying to make things happen, whether it's what we wear, how we think, what we say, what tone of voice we use. And even when our goals are from limiting beliefs and fear, we're always seeking to cause certain things. Sometimes these things are unconscious because we've been taught to be afraid of ourselves, afraid of our power, afraid of our initiative, or afraid that, we're going to get in trouble. But everything has a way of being reverse engineered back to the intent or purpose. The fourth thing that Adler said is that we're self-determining. Because we have that subjective private logic, we play a much larger role in creating our experiences and actually bending life to what we believe is true. If we look at each person and what they've created, it's largely self-created. The fifth thing that Adler said is we're holistic. That's really important to remember, especially when you're thinking about negative behavior. Everyone is trying to find their way back to that sense of belonging and significance because of being that social human being that we are. And that makes our pathway worthy, even if the methods we use take us totally off track. I mentioned in earlier episodes about how the prisoners in a Florida prison, when they were brought this Adlerian approach, they got on track with their 4 core needs without going back to their criminal behavior. So when we know that even misbehavior is related to our search to get back to those 4 core needs, we can be more understanding and become more effective in addressing that. So today's episode is called If Not Punishment, Then What? Redirecting Negative Behavior. In this, I'll be talking with you about negative behavior, including what causes it, how we typically react to it, and what are some of the more productive ways we could respond in the face of it. And while negative behavior includes conflict, it includes a lot more than conflict too. So this is a really rich topic, and today will be something of an overview with additional episodes coming up in the future to really actually take this topic and go deep with it. I'm going to be answering questions in this episode around why do people misbehave? What makes it difficult to recognize certain types of misbehavior? What have we been taught are the appropriate reactions to misbehavior? And what are some of the better ways to respond that most people have not been taught? In other words, what is redirecting negative behavior? We'll be getting into what's the definition of that and how does that differ from what we've all seen modeled over and over again. In today's episode, I'm going to be challenging conventional beliefs that many people have. And one of the big ones is that people must suffer in order to behave better. So think about yourself even. How do you think and react when people do things that make you feel annoyed, or when they make you really angry, or they hurt you, or you feel worried and burdened and concerned, or you feel insulted? So I want to share a few quotes, and then I want to get right to introducing my guest today, because that guest is just amazing. And not only are we going to do today's episode to introduce people to this topic, but she'll also be co-presenting with me on future episodes on this topic. I always love to bring quotes to the table because I just feel like it kind of grounds the intent and the emotion and the deeper element or essence of what we're covering. So one of the quotes I brought is, "It always seems impossible until it's been done." And that was said by Nelson Mandela. Who better than to know how to overcome the impossible? And really what I'm meaning by bringing this quote, it always seems impossible to choose something other than we've been choosing for misbehavior until we see it actually work. Until it's been done. So I just think that's such a fitting thing because I'm going to be challenging those conventional ways of doing it. And here's another one by Carolyn Mace. Carolyn Mace is an author. She's a mystic. She's a thought leader in a lot of spiritual circles. And she made this quote, "An insight the size of a mustard seed is powerful enough to bring down a mountain-sized illusion that may be holding our lives together. Truth strikes without mercy. We fear our intuitions because we fear the transformational power within our revelations." And I see this over and over again. I see people understanding the way humans need to be treated, what causes certain problems with humans. It often is striking down that mountain-sized illusion that feels like our lives depend on. So, even the sentence, "it strikes without mercy," it is merciful to learn a better way, but it feels frightening to us because it really does transform us. And so I encourage you to open to the transformational power within you, especially as you listen to this episode. If you determine that, wow, something about this feels right. I've never really heard it this way, or maybe I've heard it this way some of the time, but when I hear it this way, something in me feels like I'm resonating with it. So hopefully you'll have some of that experience, even if you have more questions than information at first. I want to introduce my guest because I know that she's going to be a great help in some of the major themes of this episode. I introduce you to Kristen Schweizer. Kristen has been the manager of application development at ESSA Health for almost 7 years. She leads the analytics reporting team to extract, load, transform, understand, clean, and present data to help departments, leaders, and individuals at ESSA Health to make decisions, understand processes, and answer questions. She partners with all of the departments for cross-functional support and to improve processes. She manages teams that create systems for multiple industry projects and customer service. She's a key player in the integration of the workplace culture model from Lifeworks systems, which supports her skills to increase trust, camaraderie, and consensus for greater efficiency and success. Kristen is also the mother of 4 children. I met Kristen about 4 years ago when I brought our culture transformation process to her company, ESSA, one of the largest physician-owned healthcare organizations with over 1,000 employees. And when Kristen and I first met, she told me that she'd already been studying an Adlerian psychology approach to improve her parenting. And that's exactly where I started when I first learned. So it's really a nice common bond. She was happy to have this reinforced in her workplace. So Kristen not only has embraced the LifeWorks systems culture transformation process, she has since then become a subject matter expert on the process, and she helps to onboard new employees. She's uniquely qualified to speak on many of the topics that I'll be presenting throughout the entire podcast series, but none of them more than redirecting negative behavior. Not only does Kristen learn from LifeWorks systems, we learn from Kristen as she's always seeking and learning, and she'll refer me to books and articles and video clips that really align with our work, and then I can share them out with other people. In fact, she recently sent me a clip of the Lego movie that reflected a really good example of redirecting a very specific behavior. So I'm really honored and excited to welcome her to our show. So welcome, Kristen. I'm so happy to have you here with me on this topic.
Thank you, Judy. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Do you want to tell the story about how I met you guys? Because originally you and you don't have to name names, but you were struggling, and then you got to see that solution. Okay.
Yeah, yes, I can. Sometimes you have to see something to really believe it. And I'd already been sold because I'd seen Adlerian help my family. But at work, I had a very interesting dynamic with my peer. I was having conflict in a relationship with another peer. And it wasn't anything personal. Our manager had explained it was kind of something of an organizational or cultural shadow, that those two positions had always had conflict for whatever reason. And when Judy came in to help our culture, we quickly identified that this relationship, the relationship between me and this peer, was poor, but we both wanted it to get better. So we were willing to do whatever suggestions or whatever tools or whatever Judy had advice on to make it better. And we sat down and we used a very simple tool, the dialogue tool, and we identified the lowest value of the 8 values that built trust in the relationship. This person told me the lowest value that I was giving, and I told them the lowest value they were giving, and we both gave a suggestion on how to improve it and what we wanted that to look like. And then both of us individually went back, and when we sat down with the dialogue tool, I was almost in tears because I was so upset when push came to shove and we actually sat down and talked very clearly about the kind of weakness in the relationship. I was very emotional, and I'm not normally an emotional person, certainly not at work, but I was almost in tears. And the person I was with wasn't as frustrated, but I could see that this was emotional for them too. And we went through the tool and we identified the one value to make things better. And they went back and they made a change. And I went back and I made a change. And it was almost as if a bottleneck had opened or a dam had burst, because we went from 2 people butting heads and almost being childishly wanting the attention of our boss or wanting to tattle on each other or something, to working together as a team. And out of everybody I work with, I think of this person today as one of the best relationships I have, and somebody I really count on and respect. That was not what it was like when we walked in. So I have seen it work. It almost feels like magic when you just throw yourself into it. It's just amazing.
Well, Kristen, first of all, I want to thank you for sharing that story, because it takes courage as an executive to say, I was at my wit's end, I was emotional, I didn't know what to do, couldn't get past it on my own. So just the vulnerability of that, I really appreciate, because that can really help a lot of people that say, well, I can't admit that. What I loved about that is it seemed like everything really cleared up quickly, and I don't think anybody expected that. And that really was prior to me doing the culture transformation with the company. It was just kind of the first inroad. And I think the power of the tools really showed themselves in that specific example. And then they also showed up again when I did the next retreat with you all. And after that, we really started a long-term relationship with us. So I appreciate that you were that entry point, and that both you and this other peer were willing to do the work and kind of get to see it doesn't have to be painful. So
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Kristen, do you want to just mention your feelings about redirecting negative behavior, since you know it really well also?
So I think it's magic. I think that it ties into one of those books that I recommended to you, the Hold Me Tight book about the marriage counseling. Her theory is that we have it backward, is if we have a strong emotional bond, we have really good communication. And with the redirect, it reminds me the quality of my relationship with this person is more important than me getting my way, in a way, because what I really want deep down and what they really want when they're showing these mistaken goals, we can get without punishment, and we can get without conflict, and we can get without one person winning or dominating over the other. My favorite thing about redirect is that it opens up a third way that, I mean, it sounds like ponies and unicorns and rainbows, but it really works.
Right.
And it really does feel that way,
Yeah. And it's, you can kind of see how it fits with that quote. It seems impossible until it's been done.
Yes.
And yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Well, that's because one of the things I want to cover in this episode are the assertions that we make about negative behavior. And one of them is that we have these ineffective philosophies that we've all thought are the only options. And one of them is being very punitive. And punitive can look very sophisticated, like just sneering at somebody or sighing around them or something, but it's a shaming, pain-inducing experience. And then we can also believe in, let me be permissive and use incentives and praise and all this stuff. And those are both philosophies that people think are the right way, but they're actually not the right way. And so it's until we really understand that there's a third option that you just mentioned. But because we don't understand that, negative behavior is pretty epidemic. Like right now with the pandemic going on, it's even more obvious where people are weak in their ability to behave well and where they're drawing upon some of their strengths to behave well. And I'm sure that's going to be a fluctuating thing right now. So the more skills people have, the better they can navigate through the changing times. And even those changing times that happened before this pandemic and will continue after this pandemic, how do we manage ourselves? Because even in our work, as you know, Kristen, we don't introduce redirecting negative behavior until month 7. And that's because if we just created these stronger connected relationships like you described in that book, we wouldn't have to redirect so much misbehavior when we get to the redirect tool. It's still always going to be there, but we don't have to redirect so much of it because we've set up certain conditions and conversations. So just the fact that we have so much negative behavior is important to recognize. And one of the ways that shows up is in our engagement levels. We still see year after year close to 71% or over 71% some of the time of people who are either slightly disengaged, moderately disengaged, or very actively disengaged. There's a cost associated with that. And part of it is that we keep pulling on those control models. Those control models embody permissive and punitive.
It reminds me of that quote or that story where one fish says to the other fish, "How's the water?" And the other fish says, "What water?" And because we just live and breathe this punitive, we live and breathe these control models, we don't even realize. We're not conscious to them. It just seems so normal.
That's so true, Kristen. That's why we called our first episode Spitting in the Soup, because the inherent permissiveness and punitiveness in control models is like you're right. We just think that's the way the world functions. And we don't even know we're, in the water with it.
Yeah. Or, with the relationship I brought up, I didn't even, when I say the floodgates open, hadn't even imagined something better. So when even me hearing you say, there's so much negativity and everybody's so disengaged, I start to feel defensive. But I remind myself that this is what I was taught. the trickiest thing about punishment is that it seems to work in the short term. Like it seems effective, like you
Yeah.
can get somebody to do an other directed rebellious or a C-level work, it's like on the scale of ABC, they can kind of get things done. So we think it's working when we don't realize that if we do something else, we can get A-level work and engagement.
Well, yeah, and I'll even take it a step further. It's not that it seems like it works. It actually does work.
Right. Yes,
But
in the short term. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it works short term and not even all of the time. But sometimes
Yeah.
it works short term, like when you put a gun to someone's head. But
Mm-hmm.
then you've completely set up an entirely huge set of additional side effects.
And then I have to remind myself all the time, like, I know this stuff intellectually, I've used it, but I still go back to things in my own parenting mostly, but I still can slide back into something and be unconscious about it. And I just have to remind myself that one step at a time, if I do just 1% better in a year, I will be astonished at what I can do. So I don't want to, because I beat myself up constantly. Oh, I should have redirected this instead of getting dominant, or I should have done this. But I'm getting better every time. So
I'm glad you brought it up though, because as you know, our bywords are compassion and curiosity. If but the problem is it's hard to be compassionate with ourselves because we've been taught punishment. So then we
punish ourselves.
We punish ourselves for punishing.
Yes.
We're double dipping.
Exactly.
And part of it is the forgiveness part of ourselves comes from realizing we're the exception to the rule in understanding this information. So we're going to always be influenced by the current mainstream stuff going on. Even though we don't want to be affected by it, it still draws us to think, yeah, everybody else gets to use punishment. Why can't I? On some level sometimes.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of, I think it was in a parenting book, probably a positive discipline. It talked about how hard it is to be doing something new when everybody else is doing something different, and to always be struggling against our defaults and the things that we have grouped, the behaviors and beliefs. But if we teach this to a new generation or a new set of people, they said, when you are brought up in a language, you will always have an accent. But if your children learn that language, they'll be fluent in it from the day they start.
Oh, I love that. And I remember when I first started doing this myself, I felt like I was the only one in the world doing it. I know I wasn't the only one, but there's definitely more people learning this now, and it's so exciting. So we'll all have an easier way of it the more we understand these common languages and tools. And you guys have really done a great job of that at ESSA, getting on board with the same language and tools. I don't know about how this is affecting negative behavior, but I know I got an email from your COO who was thrilled with the teamwork happening. So that's pretty cool. That I have to believe that's because you guys paid your dues and you've put in your time and you know how to handle yourself so much better.
Yeah, and then my first reaction is thinking, and we could do so much more. This is the tip of the iceberg to what we could create, and it still had amazing results.
Yeah. So the fact of it is that so many of you are already embracing it. Even as you go along, it'll just get stronger and stronger. And even the opportunity is here to say, hey, look at how well we've done, where maybe 5 years ago we wouldn't have. So, so you're right. It's always that fight between, I'm consciously incompetent, that's stage 2. And then finally saying, okay, today I'm going to be consciously competent. But we can't get there without encouragement. So really, the two ineffective philosophies are permissive and punitive, but the alternative is how do you be firm and encouraging, firm and respectful? And that's really what we're heading toward, even though we're kind of doing a little bit of a cliffhanger in the interim. I want to say another assertion about behavior is that all behavior reflects our beliefs and intentions. And most of those beliefs and intentions are below our consciousness. And so that's why I mentioned earlier that everything we do is purposeful. So when it comes to misbehavior, let's say there's somebody sitting at their desk and the boss is yelling at them for not getting their work done. It could be that that person isn't doing the work because they really like, on some level, seeking out undue attention. Or it could be that they're doing that behavior because they're in that sort of mindset that says, no, I won't, you can't make me. No matter what, that's going to be my fallback. That's often what's going on in a person when they're in that purpose. It could be that that person isn't doing the work because they're in some kind of pain and some kind of duress, And so they're going to actually strike out at other people, and it has nothing to do with the work or the job or the person at all. Or it could be that that person isn't doing it because they deep down inside don't think they're capable. Even if they are capable, they don't believe they are. Or it could be that they're not doing that assignment because they're trying to prove to the rest of the world that they're more special or important because they're actually not feeling very important. So even the same scenario in front of us could have 5 different reasons for playing out. So that's what I want the listeners to really think about. We have these behaviors that are reflecting where our heads are at. I've got 2 more assertions I want to make, but before I do, I want to make sure that I take a minute here. About halfway through, I always try to remind the listeners that LifeWorks Systems is here for you. We specialize in performance management through the healthy culture transformation. Or sometimes people just take a course and then they take another course, but ideally it's through healthy culture transformation. So go to our website and learn more about us and how you can get involved with us, including access to the information related to today's episode and to future episodes. So you can find us at lifeworksystems.com. Subscribe to our podcast and find the main points on each podcast. We invite you to also join our mailing list so that you receive information on free videos, webinars, articles, surveys, assessments, my book, how to contact us by phone or email. So just about anything you want is on that website. And when you go to our website and you look at the details of this episode, you're going to find resources that we'll share with you. In fact, I'll include the book that Kristen just mentioned and about a bazillion other pieces of reference material because she's a researcher and a learner. So we'll get as many resources as we can to you on some of these topics and those that are related. So Kristen, I'm just going to come back and feel free to jump in on these. One of the assertions that I want to mention is that all misbehaving people are discouraged. It doesn't seem like it always looks that way, does it?
No, not at all.
No, it seems like most of misbehavior looks arrogant, selfish, lazy, cocky, uncaring. But the fact of it is, I'm just really asking people to assume that what I'm saying is true. Sometimes it can look discouraged. It can look like somebody's very down in the mouth, but typically it doesn't look like they're discouraged. What we mean by discouraged is it means that they're not getting those 4 core needs met. And what's also important is that our response to misbehavior has a profound and very significant impact. So we don't know that. We don't realize that our response is the deciding factor. So, Kristen, I thought it would be really good for us to tell the train story, and I didn't know if you wanted to or if you wanted me to. I'm okay either way.
The train story. This has always generated quite an emotional response when I've retold it. So there was a big, burly man who got on a train, and he was in a foul mood. You could just tell it was emanating off of him. And he was strong, and he was intimidating. He was sharp to other passengers, and he was clearly drunk. Everyone on the train was very scared of him, and they didn't want to assert themselves against him or tell him what to do or to get out of the way or to stop scaring people. An older man on the train noticed this large, upset, drunk worker who was causing the scene. And the older man did exactly the opposite of what a lot of people would have done, and he welcomed him. Am I on track so far, Judy?
Yeah. He actually, the first thing he said is, "Hey, what are you drinking?"
Right. Yes. He welcomed him. He said, "Hey, what are you drinking? How are you?" Like he was an old friend. And everybody just watched this because they thought the man wouldn't like this reaction. And the man initially did not appreciate it and got even more belligerent and more overpowering and more towering and intimidating. But this did not faze the old man. And he said, "Come over here and sit with me. What did you drink? Tell me some more." And now I'm forgetting the rest of the story because I feel self-conscious.
That's okay. It's a tough story. So you're very on track. So it's like train and track, right?
Yes.
So it is a tough story, but I want to do just a tiny bit of background in it. And I love it that we're doing it together. I love it. I even love hearing your way of telling it. I just want to mention that this story is actually a story out of Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence. So those of you that have that book at home can pull this story out. It was like one of the best parts of that entire book in my mind. But what happened was when the old man said, "Hey, what you drinking?" the guy responded by saying, "Saki, what's it to you anyway?" I mean, he got like really trying to push back on that. And the old man said, instead of getting intimidated, he said, oh my gosh, I love sake. My wife and I, we heat a little pot up and every morning and go out into our garden where we have these gorgeous persimmon trees. And the whole time he's walking toward this laborer. And then he said, do you like persimmon trees? And by that time, the guy's kind of like looking at him like, do I know you? And he says, yeah, I like persimmon trees. All right. And he's kind of calming down. And then the old man says, and I bet you have a great wife too. And that was really a turn point for this man, because he looked at the old man and he said, my wife died a month ago and I started drinking. And today I lost my job over it. And the old man, he's right up to him and he says, oh my goodness, you're really struggling. Why don't we go back to the back of the train car and talk it through, because you've really been through a hard time. And so they go to the back of the train and everybody's kind of like, whew, we didn't see that coming. And then when there's actually an observer that's a friend of Daniel Goleman's on the train, and he looks back at the end of the train ride and he thinks, oh my gosh, that was brilliant. And that's what he says to Daniel Goleman, that was emotional brilliance. And so our response is the differentiator very often. I think I just read recently that their police officers don't have guns. So because they don't have guns, they're in a position where they have to learn all these skills to kind of bring people down from wherever they're being violent or angry without the use of a gun or weapon. And some of the American police have been sent to them to find out what they've been taught so that they don't overuse weapons. I just recently heard that.
Yeah, we forget, I think, that I don't know if the science is exactly right, but the way it's been explained to me when I've read about it is that we have a brain that has multiple levels. And one of the biggest levels, because we're mammals, is the limbic system. And in order for that to be healthy, we have to be emotionally connected to each other. And it's unconscious. It doesn't talk. The emotional brain can talk to our logical brain, but our logical brain can't talk to our emotional brain, which is why things like meditation or somatic or physical releases can work so well, because they speak directly to the emotional brain.
I think what you're really seeing when you're saying that is that when we are a redirector,
yes,
our response is that of a person that's maintained their center.
Yes.
Even the train story, the observer of the train story was a man that was practicing a martial art where it was all about, how do I be mindful when an attacker's coming at me and I blend toward them so that neither of us get hurt. Mm-hmm. Even if I have to throw them or whatever, I'm going to do it in a way where both of us are being helped. And so when a person is redirecting, it's like the height of emotional intelligence, because they have to be aware of, oh, I see what's going on. I see what's being triggered inside me, but I haven't let it taken over my amygdala, my front cortex, mm-hmm. where I go into fight or flight. I haven't gone there. And so from that place of recognizing what's going on, we manage ourselves and we manage the dynamic between the other person and us. And it's, to some extent, it's a discipline, and it's something that you have faith in after you've done it and it works. But in the beginning, it almost feels as difficult as it is when a dog first comes at us. We just want to run. And we have to school ourselves to have a different response.
It's also come up recently because I ride horses, and I have a horse. And there's always these mystical horse whisperers that you can see that contain these wild horses. And there's one trainer that's really getting into it because he says he's teaching horses to meditate and be present. When a half-ton animal can tell that you're listening to it and you're attuned to it, it will relax. And it's just fascinating to me that what we're seeing for human centering and grounding, we can affect other animals. I mean, not with words, not with logic at all, but just by being present.
I know that's kind of off on a tangent I wasn't anticipating, but it's so true. I was watching that movie that I mentioned, I Am, and they showed the work of heart math. And heart math showing around us is this, it's not an aura, but it's actual magnetic energy fields that convey our emotions to one another. And they even had one of the main characters hooked up to this monitor. And when he would think of negative things, the little monitor would go way over to one side. And that's how we're actually picking up each other's feelings. And so I love that you're talking about horses that way. And as you know, I always have people in the culture process watch the movie Buck.
Yes.
Because, that movie is a perfect example of what you're describing. He attunes himself and he teaches the horses to attune to him.
Yeah. And even in redirect too, even if we're just grounding ourselves, even if the other person isn't in on it in a way, if they don't know what we're doing, like it's great, like in our culture at ESSA Health, where we know what tools we're using and we're all on board. but you can do this with somebody who has no idea what you're doing. And you're not, you're helping them too.
Were you going to say?
Yes, I was going to say, yes, you're not manipulating.
I want to pull your chain. I want to say something that might sound wrong. You are manipulating behavior, but we're always manipulating behavior. We're either manipulating it from our own fear, or we're manipulating it from our own belief in the goodness of people. So manipulation has gotten a bad rap because we always think about how we're using it selfishly. And a lot of times we are using it selfishly if we're in misbehavior.
But I guess the better word would be influencing.
Influencing feels a lot better, but really in reality, they're both kind of the same because you're actually causing the changed behavior.
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Just like you manipulate somebody's back when it's out of alignment, that's a manipulation. Mm-hmm. Anything that you use can be used for good or evil. In our first podcast, we had that story about the 8th grader that had the peace pledge crammed down his throat. So that was a good tool, bad system. Mm-hmm. Manipulation is a good tool when it's done out of a loving intent, and not the kind of loving intent like I'm beating you with a belt because I love you, not that kind of loving intent, but the kind of loving intent that actually feels loving, like the man on the train, who by the end of the labor was sprawled across his lap sobbing.
Yeah, or even that Lego clip, that's so quick, but you can hear the actor when the person's saying, you are the most talented, special, and you could tell he meant it. Like, you are a powerful, amazing person.
Yes, exactly. And so our response, getting back to that assertion, our response has a profound and significant impact. But we have to be absolutely wise and centered. Like, I can't treat a misbehaving person like that drunk. I can't treat him like a good human being if I don't remember that he's discouraged. Now, when he came on the train, he didn't look discouraged. He just looked mean and intimidating and thoughtless. But deep down inside, you could see he had actually had the symptoms of one of the goals called the goal of revenge, where he was in pain, and probably in his family, when men were in pain, they didn't cry. When men were in pain, they avoided that feeling and they went and got drunk or something. Boys don't cry. And so part of the reason that we misbehave is because we're in pain or we're suffering something and we don't have any idea how to get out of it in a productive way. I mean, like, you have given me a million examples of how that's happened with your family, where you're like, hey, why is this happening? And then we talk of it through the redirect tool guidelines, and you're like, oh yeah, now I can really see how it's that particular pattern.
The one of the most profound ones that I've had, there's that work example with significance, and then there was that person who's politically pretty opposite of me. And I didn't even interact with this person, but just grounding myself and reminding myself that they're discouraged and I'm insecure. Really changed the whole energy of it.
Yes, it's absolutely an energy thing as well as a very pragmatic, like physical experience, but it is an energy thing too. And Kristen is mentioning one of 5 mistaken behavior patterns called the goal of significance. You'll learn about that if you hang in here with this topic, not necessarily today, but as we go forward with it. I want to go over just a few more things before we end today, because hopefully you're getting an idea that this redirect thing might be worth checking out. I'm hoping that you as the listeners can see that. So I want to just tell you, first of all, what redirect is so that it's not this big mystery. It is a technique. It's a technique that helps people stop a cycle of limited thinking and behaving that's coming out of discouragement and fear. So that train story is a great example. The guy was coming out of fear and discouragement. He had lost his job. He had lost his wife. And he was in this place of nobody cares and I don't know how to function. I might as well just push everybody away. And so the old man was able to use this technique he used to stop the cycle of limited thinking and behaving. Now, I don't know if he had ever been taught something to teach him to do that, but somehow he had the skill to do what we teach in redirect. So redirect is when somebody's doing that. They're stopping a cycle of limited thinking and behaving. It's a method to diagnose and treat the true causes of negative behavior. So when I said that guy not doing his work could be for 5 totally different reasons, how do we know which reason it is unless we have a method for diagnosing and treating it? And it's a respectful and honoring way that's an alternative to traditional punishment or bribing or shaming or, pampering or anything permissive or punitive. So basically, when a person is redirecting, what they do is they first have to stop and take a breath and look for certain clues that we're going to tell you about in other episodes. So when you have certain feelings, thoughts, and inclinations, that tells you what pattern someone is in. And once you identify that pattern, which is called mistaken goals of fear or limitation, the limiting goals, depending upon the clues you recognize in yourself. And then you focus on very specific incident when you're redirecting, because somebody could be doing the same behavior another time and it's a totally different goal. And then you have these steps you take depending on which pattern has been identified. So a lot of times when you're responding, it's kind of counterintuitive, like that old man coming up and saying, "Hey, what you drinking?" That looks counterintuitive. To some people, they'd say that looked crazy, but he was responding rather than reacting. And he was responding to the best in that person, not to the discouraged and fearful and limiting beliefs of the person. So that's kind of what redirect is. Kristen, I don't think this conversation would be good without mentioning how it ties in with personal responsibility, because those that have been listening know that this is a responsibility-based culture model, and personal responsibility is at the core of so many things. And even though I've been referring to responsibility, I've never really gone over the personal responsibility chart with people. So just so you who are listening know, if you're visual, I'll send you something that shows the personal responsibility chart in it so that you have a visual of it. A lot of times people will take it and put it up on their refrigerator or keep it in their office. So what personal responsibility really is at the core is it's a belief system. When we're believing that we don't have choices, that we're in situations where we have to, that there's an authority figure that has more control over us than we have over ourselves. That's the illusion we're in when we're in a state of mind called other directed. So other directed just means I'm not directed from myself out, inside out. I'm directed by something other than my truest internal authority. So other directed is when we believe we have no choice. We have beliefs, attitudes, reactions, feelings about our reactions, and our behaviors that all show up. And they show up when we're other directed, and they show up with something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later called self-directed. So when a person is other directed and they're in that mindset, they're going to be saying things like, I have to, I can't, I ought to, I need to, I'll try, probably. I mean, there's a whole lot of words that can help you to recognize when somebody's in this, I don't really know what my choice is. I don't really believe I have a choice. We can hear it in their tone of voice. We can see it in their body language, and we can hear it in their actual word choices. So when somebody's in other directed, one of the attitudes they could take is, and they can do both of these tracks of attitudes that I'm going to go through. They could even kind of intermix them, but one of them is to resentfully comply. And then what happens is, the way that they show up in their reaction, their resentment, they don't feel responsible for that. They feel as if the circumstances are responsible. They don't feel any personal. So there's a lot of blame that goes on when we're in other directed. And the way that the person shows up is very much like a victim. So when you think about the disengagement levels that I think I've talked about before, when there's a 55% of our population that is doing C- work and just kind of doing the bare minimum, they're pretty much in resentful compliance. You'll hear them say on Monday morning, it's Monday again. I guess I have to do this job again. And so there's a feeling of Eeyore with that. When a person does a different attitude, they puff themselves up so they don't feel that sense of I have no choice. And they put on this fake power, and then they rebel and resist. And when they rebel and resist, they don't even see that they're doing it a lot of the time. And they certainly don't think it's their fault that they're doing it. And then what they're doing is sort of revengeful or mean-spirited. So an example I like to give, and this is a great example of how crazy it can look. There was a guy that I dated one time, and I asked him, why don't you wear your safety belt, just out of curiosity? And he said, well, I'm not letting the government control me. And I said, the government's not even in the car with us. But clearly he was somebody that was immediately, when it came to putting his safety belt on, he was going into this place of, nobody's going to make me do that. Even though he had young children, even though he had not even checked in with whether he would live with the consequences well, he was a knee-jerk reaction to an authority figure. So that's kind of what other directed means. Every person who's misbehaving is somewhere in that realm of other directed. And that's why their behavior is so unconscious to them, because they don't even think they're the one making the choices, in essence.
People who are other directed aren't grounded. You know, they don't know what they're feeling, and they don't really know what they want in a way. Like you said, they're just knee jerking.
Yeah, I doubt he realized he was doing what he did. I remember one time a man was in a class for parenting and was learning this, and he said, "Oh my God, I have been living my whole life from this side of the chart." But he didn't really have awareness of it until he had heard it and heard
Mm-hmm.
multiple examples of it. But when we're in a really good place, we remember we have choice. So that's called self-directed. A person that does redirecting negative behavior has to be coming from self-directedness in order to do it. Because when you're in self-directed, you're very aware of your freedom. You're very aware of, I am choosing. And when you're choosing, the first thing you're doing is saying, what am I feeling? And what do I want? And in the case of somebody misbehaving, what am I feeling tells me what the other person is operating out of. And then I can ask myself, what do I want in the face of that? Which is very different than if I'm unconsciously just knee-jerk reacting to their behavior. So when a person is self-directed, they're not going to make excuses for their choices. They're going to say, I have choices. Even if I was Nelson Mandela in prison for 28 years, I still have choices. Clearly, he exercised choices or he wouldn't have maintained his sanity under those conditions. He came out a stronger leader. So sometimes we're tempted to say, well, aren't there some things where we don't have a choice? No, we always have a choice, even if it's in how we're going to stay centered in something.
I just shared an article. I don't know much about this person, Terry Waite. He was part of the Anglican Church, and he was sent over to a country to negotiate for some hostages, and he ended up getting kidnapped, and he was in solitary confinement for 5 years. And the article is about how he went through it and the lessons that we can learn. And one of the things he said is that he decided he was not going to allow self-pity or destructive or spiraling thoughts. He just wasn't going to do it. And so this is an example of a person who is in solitary confinement, who is being kidnapped, who's being tortured, and he still pressed his pants every day. He put his pants under the mattress to press them so he had some dignity. And he made a conscious decision, I'm not going to go into self-pity for this. And he took it a day at a time. It was just a wonderful story. I thought it was beautiful.
Well, Kristen, not only is the story amazing, which we'll put on the website, it's amazing that you understand the power of that. Because sometimes when I'm teaching this personal responsibility chart, people will get so defensive. They're defending other directedness. Well, yeah,
Yes.
but what if
Yes.
you have to go to work? Well, what if this, and they're automatically like begging you to say you don't have choice.
Yeah, like you give up your power in that sense. It's hard. I certainly understand. I'm often other directed myself. Everybody is. But yeah, you miss out on, I don't know, keeping yourself in that spot is just keeping yourself so small.
It really is. And you get that. And a lot of people eventually get that go through this work and they don't drop out. They stay the course. They really get this. They see that personal responsibility is actually joy and freedom. It's a sense of strength and integrity and power. But we don't know it at first because we've been so beaten down with our power. So just to finish it out, when somebody's in self-directed, not only can they say yes without it being fine, or they can say no. They can say no without it being a no, I won't, you can't make me. But they can also choose other ideas for how they want to handle something because they're more thoughtful about what conditions under which they can say yes, no, or something in the middle. And that's a really amazing space that it opens up. Really, redirect is in that space, a third option. And so a person in self-directed is always thinking of the negative and positive consequences of what they're doing. And they feel 100% responsible for their behavior and their thoughts. Their reactions aren't reactions, they're responses. And their behavior shows up as accountable and mature and fully engaged. So really people that are the redirectors are people that are fully engaged. They've become fully engaged and they're high performing in engagement. Not that they're perfect at it, but that they do it more regularly and they continue to improve it. I'm glad we brought that up, that we made sure we included that in the conversation. I think now would be a good time for us to end this particular episode. As you all can imagine here, we haven't even really barely tapped in. You don't know much about the 5 mistaken goals and how you redirect them. We have some other themes that we're going to be going over in our next session, but I just want to thank you for hanging in this far. And hopefully you're sort of chewing on this notion of, wow, I thought there's no gain without pain. And they're telling me we don't have to go through pain to get really big gains. And hopefully you can see that from the train story. Hopefully you can see that from the way that we're talking about this topic. I want to thank all of you for listening today. This podcast is brought to you by LifeWorks Systems and myself, Judy Ryan, as the host and the CEO of LifeWorks Systems. The intent of the podcast is to provide you with hope and new ideas for greater joy in your life and in your work. For more information on our organization, be sure to go to lifeworksystems.com and subscribe to all of our offerings, our podcast and mailing list. And if you find that this episode or any others in the series have really been helpful and valuable to you, please give us a 5-star rating, because this makes a difference in helping people choose to select our podcast, which allows us to help more people. So Kristen, I look forward to doing more of these with you. I really appreciate you being here and for the hard work you're doing at ESSA and in your home.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to doing more.
Great. So together with Kristen, we invite you to join us in creating a world where all people love their lives and where you can grow masterful in making sure your life works today. Bye-bye now.
Thank you for listening to LifeWorks Today. This podcast has been brought to you by LifeWorks Systems CEO and host Judy Ryan. The intent of this podcast is to provide you with hope and new ideas for greater joy in your life and work. For more information on our organization and earlier podcast episodes, related articles, videos, and more, please visit our website at lifeworksystems.com. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and mailing list. We invite you to join us in creating a world in which all people love their lives and where your life works today.